Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Mathematics. Today we are continuing our journey with functions. We already looked at how to evaluate normal functions and then we looked at composite functions. And today we'll be finishing off functions and looking at how to find the inverse of a function. So at the end of this video, you should be able to do one thing. That is to correctly find the inverse of given functions. So let's head straight into our first example. So when we have a normal function, we want to find the inverse of a function. We must go through certain steps before we can actually find the inverse. So these steps, you may want to remember these steps. There's a concept behind these steps, but the main thing for us to remember right now is just how to, go through these steps. 4 simple steps. So we have the first example. Given f of x is equal to 2x plus 5, find f inverse of x. And as you can see, this is the symbol that we use for inverse. That little negative one at the top, that is the inverse symbol. So this is read f inverse of x. So the steps are simple, 4 simple steps. And with constant practice, you will be able to commit these to memory. So the first step is to replace f of x with y. So we have the function f of x is equal to 2x plus 5. Step 1, we want to replace this f of x function with y. So this will now be y is equal to 2x plus 5. And after we are done with replacing the f of x with y, now we want to interchange the x and y value. We want to exchange the x and y value. Wherever you see x, you'll put y, and wherever you see y, you'll put x. So this will be, we have y here, so this will be x is equal to 2, instead of x now, we'll say y plus 5. And the most important step, the step that gives students a lot of trouble, we now want to make y the subject of the formula. So to make y the subject of this formula, we want to isolate y by itself. So what we need to do, the first thing we want to take over is the plus 5. So the 5 is adding, so we take it over the equal sign. The opposite of addition is subtraction, because whenever we take a term or a number over the equal sign, whatever operation it was doing, it will do the opposite when it goes over. So the 5 is adding, so we take that 5 over, it will, opposite of addition, subtraction. So we'll have x subtract 5 is equal to 2y. And lastly, we want to take over the 2. So we see the 2 here is multiplying the y. So we take the 2 over the equal sign. The opposite of multiplication is division. So this will now give us x subtract 5 all divided by 2 is equal to y. And the last step is to, of course, rewrite the notation. So that the question initially asks us to find f inverse of x. And this here that we just found is f inverse of x. So it's just to replace y with the notation. So this will be, we can just put y over on the left hand side and put the inverse over the other side. So this will be f inverse of x is equal to x minus 5 all divided by 2. And that is how you find the inverse of any functions. Some of the working may be different, but all we need to do is remember these 4 steps. You replace f of x with y, you exchange the x and y values, wherever you see y, you put x, and wherever you see x, you put y. And then the big step, we make y the subject of the formula. Then of course, we replace y with the inverse symbol. So let's head into another example. Let's say we are given the function g of x is equal to 7x minus 5. And they ask us to determine the value of g inverse of 16. So many students may look at this question and they will jump to go and replace 16 inside the function g of x. But we must be careful. The question is asking us to find g inverse of 16 and not g of 16, g inverse of 16. So before we can find g inverse of 16, we must find the inverse function. So we must find the inverse of g of x. So we'll go through the same steps that we did just now. Step 1, we'll replace g of x with y. So we'll have y is equal to 7x minus 5. Step 2, we interchange the x and the y values. So wherever we have x, we put y. Wherever we have y, we'll put x. So this will be x is equal to 7y minus 5. And then the big step, we make y the subject of the formula. So firstly, we have the 5 subtracting. So we take the 5 over the equal sign. We'll have x plus 5 is equal to 7y. Then of course, we have the 7 multiplying the y. So we'll take the 7 over, so it will divide. So you'll have x plus 5 all divided by 7 is equal to y. And the last step, we replace y with the inverse notation. So we'll have, in this case, we'll have g inverse. So g inverse of x is equal to x plus 5 all divided by 7. So this is where now we can now find g inverse of 16. We have the inverse notation, we have the inverse function. So g inverse of x is equal to x plus 5 all divided by 7. Now we can proceed to find g inverse of 16. So what we will do, we will substitute 16 in the inverse function. So we will now have g inverse of 16 is equal to, instead of x plus 5, we replace x with 16. So this will be 16 plus 5 all divided by 7. So 16 plus 5 will give me 21 divided by 7. So 21 divided by 7 would give us 3. So g inverse of 16 is equal to 3. And that is how we find the inverse of a function at a certain point or with a substituting a number. So before we can substitute any number in the inverse function, we must first find that inverse function. We cannot substitute the 16 in g of x. We must find the inverse of g of x. And then we take that function, that inverse function, and we substitute the 16. So let's proceed to another example. So this example says, given f of x is equal to 5x minus 2 all divided by 3, determine f inverse of x. So you see, this is a slightly different question, a slightly different function, and they're asking us to find the inverse of this function. So we follow the same steps. The steps will remain the same regardless of the function. So we follow the same steps. So step 1, we replace f of x with y. So you'll have y is equal to 5x minus 2 all divided by 3. Step 2, we interchange the x and the y. So wherever we have x, we put y. Wherever we have y, we put x. So this will be x is equal to 5y minus 2 all divided by 3. And then the big step, we make y the subject of the formula. So in this case, we cannot take over 2 first. We must take over the 3. The 3 is dividing everything. So we take over the 3. So when we take the 3 over, it will multiply. So we'll have 3x is equal to 5y subtract 2. And then now we take over the 2. The 2 is subtracting, and we take it over to divide. When we take it over, it will divide. So we'll have 3x, and we take the 2 over, it will add. So this will be plus 2 is equal to 5y. And we will continue at the top here. And last but not least, we take over the 5. So the 5 is multiplying the y, and we take it over, it will divide. So we'll have 3x plus 2 all divided by 5 is equal to y. And last but not least, we cannot forget to put back our inverse notation. So we'll have f inverse of x is equal to 3x plus 2 all divided by 5. And if this question then proceeds and asks us to find f inverse of 0. So let's say that asks us now to find f inverse of 0. This will simply be wherever we have x in the function, we're replacing it and we're putting 0. This will be 3 multiplied by, instead of x, 0 plus 2 all divided by 5. And 3 times 0 is 0. 0 plus 2 would give you 2. So this will give us 2 over 5. So f inverse of 0 is equal to 2 over 5. And that is how we find the inverse of this function. That is also how we find f inverse of 0. So you must remember, before we substitute anything in any inverse function, we must first find that inverse function, and then we do any substitution. So let's look at the last example of how these inverse functions can come, how these functions can come and ask us to find the inverse. So this one is a bit more challenging, so we need to be careful when we are working these kind. So the question says, determine the inverse of h of x is equal to 3x minus 5 all divided by x minus 1. So in cases like these, we follow the same steps, but we'll have to do one extra something when we are changing the subject. So let's look at that. So the first thing we want to do, we want to replace h of x with y. So we'll have y is equal to 3x minus 5 all divided by x minus 1. And then step 2, we interchange the x and the y. So wherever we have y, we'll put x. This will be x is equal to 3y minus 5 all divided by y minus 1. So wherever you have x, you put y. So we had 2 x's, so we'll have to replace both of those x's with y. So the next step now, the big step, we make y the subject of the formula. And this is where we have to be careful. So what we want to do, we see y minus 2 is dividing. So when we take that over, it will multiply. So we'll have x multiplied by y minus 1 is equal to 3y minus 5. So what we want to do, we have x multiplied by y minus 1. So we want to distribute this x throughout this bracket. We want to get rid of the brackets. So we distribute. So x times y would give us xy. And x times negative 1 would simply give us negative x. And that is equal to 3y minus 5. So remember, the whole objective is to make y the subject. But in this case, we see we have a y here and we have a y here. So we need to do something so that we are just left with one y. We cannot have 2y. So let's put those two terms with y together on the left hand side. So we'll have xy, and we bring over this 3y. So it's adding, we take the little subtract. So xy subtract 3y is equal to, and on this side we're left with negative 5. And when we take over this minus x, it will become plus x. So now we have xy minus 3y is equal to negative 5 plus x. Remember, the whole objective is to make y the subject. So we have two y's together. Of course, these are not like terms, so we cannot say we add them together and then we take over. They are two unlike terms. So how can we turn these two terms with y and make it one y? So what we can do something that we learned previously. We can factorize this side of the equation. So we have xy and we have 3y. So the common factor we see there is y. So we factor out that y. So we'll have y, when we factor out the y from xy, we're left with x. Subtract, when we factor out the y from 3y, we're left with 3. And that will be equal to negative 5 plus x. So we have y multiplied by x minus 3. So of course we want to make y the subject. So we take over the x minus 3. So since the x minus 3 is multiplying, when we take it over, it will divide. So we'll have y is equal to negative 5 plus x, all divided by x minus 3. And then the last step, we must remember, we must replace y with the inverse notation, which will be, in this case, it will be h inverse of x, and that will be equal to negative 5 plus x, all divided by x minus 3. That is how we find the inverse of these kind of functions. So in this approach, we see we did something slightly different. We had to do some factorization. So from the time you have a function that is in this form like this, from the time you have two x's, immediately you should be thinking about at some point of this question, at some point of solving this question, we will have to do some amount of factorization. So it's just to put the terms with the y's together and then factor out that y. As remember, that is the only way we can be left with one y. And with that, it has brought us to the end of this video on the inverse of functions. And I trust that you now have a solid understanding of finding the inverse of functions. Now it's just for you now to practice these questions and you'll have a solid understanding and you'll breeze through the exam of any inverse function. So with that, I'll see you until the next video.